So now we're going to talk about stone. Basically, masonry includes a lot of things, but stone is what we're going to concentrate in terms of masonry. So masonry can include brick, stone, which is marble, granite, limestone, all sorts of things, manufactured stone, concrete, glass, stucco and tile. But we're going to concentrate, as I said, in terms of this is just a small talk about stone in itself. In Australia, stone masonry is primarily used as a veneer. Feature walls, fireplaces, garden walls and landscaping. So outdoors, no problem with that at all. In terms of indoors, I love stone. It can be nothing more natural than stones. I even walk around often with stones, different types of stones in my pocket when I go to jobs, just to feel them and touch them. And stones are just a beautiful thing. The only issue with stone is potentially some can be radioactive in some areas. For example, in Italy, there are big problems in some parts of Italy with the granite. There have been some cases, reported cases, where really the radioactiveness of that granite used as bench tops, where Italian mamas spend a lot of time in the kitchen and they're pressed right up against in close proximity to the bench tops, have had issues in terms of radioactivity poison from the granite. So just be mindful if you're going to spend a bit on granite tops. Granite is one of the more higher risk stones in terms of radioactivity. So there is something in your building materials reading where they looked in Europe in terms of radioactivity and the different forms of radioactivity in stone and concrete and plasterboard and so on. So have a look there, but otherwise it's wonderful thermal mass. So sometimes I prefer, instead of putting a massive concrete slab down, because it also looks lovely, in terms of indoors where we know it's just going to be hot in that area, we can put a lovely stone feature on the floor and have everything, the sun hit that stone and it will hold that heat and go. But you don't have to heat an entire house concrete slab, which never really happens. So also the issue with the concrete slab is that you need to insulate that slab from the ground. The ground is really cold, and if you don't insulate the corners in that slab properly, it's very hard to heat, and it's quite difficult to insulate properly. So it's another issue there. Whereas if you've got that thermal mass inside, and so it's in that warm environment, and you've got it just where the sun falls most of the time, that's fantastic. And also if it's not a lot, but you put it around the fireplaces, then you know, because it's not a lot, in summer it's not going to be an issue, but in summer it can also help absorb some of the heat and help it keep cooler. But every time you use the fire, if you use a fire, it will heat that stone, and when you go to bed, the fire dies out, that heat will slowly be released back in. You can wake up. I've had this in many homes, particularly some friends in Daylesford, which is a very cold part of Victoria, have put that in place, and I slept there a couple of nights and in winter, midwinter, and it is remarkable how you can wake up and actually still be warm, and you step outside and it is freezing. Of course it's the insulation, and this is way off the ground. This was a pole house with a big insulated floor and windows and so on. But when they put that fire on and all that stone heated up, they're absolutely magnificent, and stayed warm the whole night, and especially in the early morning when it's usually very cold. Extremely durable, lifespan of hundreds of years. You know, stone houses, you'll see them standing forever. It's such a natural product. In terms of building biology principles, it's such a natural product. So in harmony with nature, particularly if you source it locally, and it has high thermal mass. Really the only question mark is that, like any stone, it has a risk of radioactivity. It has high compressive strength. It's inert, doesn't emit any VOCs, no toxicity. High thermal mass, so we can use it instead of big concrete slab. Good sound insulation, it's not all echoey and horrible. And high fire resistance, although it may crack and crumble and so on fires, it has a very good fire rating. And it's pest proof. Not many pests interested in gnawing their way through a piece of granite. The radioactivity emitted from the granite used to build New York's Grand Central Station train station is more than 3 times that of background levels, exceeding the legal limit permitted by nuclear power plants. So that's just an example, a good example, that the Grand Central train station is that sort of radioactive with that amount of granite in. If you've ever been there, it's a magnificent site, Grand Central Station, all that beautiful granite, and it's huge, and light coming through the windows and so on. But it's something you've got to be mindful of. It's not that it's only granite, but granite seems to have one of the higher risks. And in the US, there are often more problems there in terms of radioactivity. They build basements, and so radon gas testing is almost normal there, where we don't do a hell of a lot of that here. Not to say there's no radioactivity here, but the risk is potentially not as big in many areas. So a stone that may emit radon, a known source of lung cancer, are derived from granite, aluminium, shale, clay or coal. And their hygroscopicity varies. So the harder the stone, the greater its moisture resistance. So obviously the more porous it is and less dense, the more hygroscopic it will be. So you can find a nice match where it has a good bit of thermal mass, but will also help with excess humidity and have some hygroscopicity. It's a hard word to say. Cold surface, so it is difficult to warm. Like concrete, stone is cold and it'll be difficult to warm, but you don't do your entire house foundation on stone. The dew point is easily reached, leading to increased condensation and moisture problems. So again, it's a balance. Just use it in smaller areas where sun falls, so it's always nice and warm, well, most of the time, and you shouldn't have those issues. It does have a high embodied energy. It's very, very heavy. It requires a lot of mining and drilling and all sorts to break it up and get it out and truck it out and get it to you. So because it's a heavy thing, you've got to get it out of the ground. It is a high embodied energy. Flaws, porosity and cracking may allow moisture to penetrate if it's in frost-prone areas. And it's unreliable for load bearing. Yeah, we don't want to use it for load bearing. We basically just put it on the floor for thermal mass, and we put it near fireplaces, or we put it outside on pavers and so on. But I wouldn't want to use it for load bearing. Requires a high level of specialist skill to install. That's a problem in this country as well, is that to build a stone anything, it's a lot of dollars per hour for some specialist, good stonemason, to come and build walls or do whatever. But if you can incorporate it in balance, I personally think that when you see timber, stone, and alternative stuff like hempcrete, for example, mixed with recycled bricks. So when you get a very rustic recycled brick look next to some very slick timber, next to a stone feature, to me it looks magnificent, and you've used very natural products. Natural materials. So that's kind of the line I like to go down. There's also I'll mention the alternative building materials, but the DuraWall straw, sort of compressed straw boards that are much nicer to use for walls instead of the echoey plasterboard type thing. So there are natural products out there that are readily available. It just needs to all be balanced. So I'd give it 7 out of 10. There's only a small question mark just because of the radioactivity, which is the most toxic form. So we have to bump it a bit on that, and because it's a cold surface. But otherwise, very natural, very beautiful. Source it locally, use it in balance, and it's well scored.